All right, thank you for joining this webinar. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Debbie Buyaki, and I am one of the co-leads at Youth for Ecocide Law. Today and this week, we will be celebrating Earth Week to give applause to our only known home in the universe. And we kick this off by starting a conversation that is intergenerational to discuss how we can protect it using the law. And by this, I will proceed not to take much of your time and read something short that I came up with to reinforce our position as Youth for Ecocide Law, Stop Ecocide, and Ecocide generally, and the position of the youth as it is now in regard to the climate crisis and the extinctions of all ecosystems that could potentially happen if we do not take action. My speech, I wouldn't call it speech, but my intervention is titled, We Demand the Voices of All Species Be Heard. And it starts, according to the National Geographic Society, there are over 8.7 million species on Earth. Birds, insects, plants, bacteria, and also to the list is human beings. According to Harvard biologist E.O. Wilson, out of this collective number, human beings cause 30,000 species to go extinct, or in other words, 3 species go extinct per hour. According to Earther, 97% of the Earth's ecosystem is no longer ecologically intact. This means that the remaining 3% of land are the only areas that have undisturbed habitats and healthy populations for the original species to grow and inhabit. We cannot separate ourselves or talk about nature or the earth without adding ourselves to the sentence. Besides, who is extincting all these species that I have mentioned? If I may hold up the mirror to us. Earth, as do all these species and in all their different ecosystems, deserve life as much as we do. How could we survive without each other? Where will we get our water, our air, our essence? Whatever fabric of life that makes them is the same one we're cut from. We bear the same genes. Gearing up to 2030, the 2030 benchmark, the science has been clear all along. We need to change our actions or Earth will not be able to support life of us and the billions of species that exist in it sufficiently. Shattering statistics continue to suffice. One with stating that if we may surpass the 1.5 benchmark in the next 5 years, and we know the ripple effects of that, life will not be the same. However, the climate and ecological crisis, if not emergency, is seemingly not alarming enough to the huge contributors, mostly etched within the fossil fuel, oil, and gas industries, and in some way, the enabling governments. Accountability has become a concept that was thrown out the window, and the window of a burning house called Earth. Young people across the world are clear that this cannot continue. It has to stop. We are and soon will be the majority of the world population and are next to, if not the current generation. All these decisions being made by the wealthy or by governments without our absolute involvement are going to ultimately affect our lives, and so for the longest. Therefore, we demand that our voices be heard not only on the ground, but also on decision-making tables. By this, we present our key demands as Youth for Ecocide Law on behalf of the youth and species across the world. We call on all governments that haven't yet recognized the crime of ecocide, which is mass destruction of ecosystems. I like to call it the stubborn mass destruction of ecosystems because the science is right in front of their eyes, yet they insist on it. So we call on all governments that haven't recognized the crime of ecocide and the destruction of ecosystems by all involved stakeholders as a crime under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court to do so, not only as a misdemeanor, but as a criminal offense, joining with the other 4 crimes charged by the court. By this, we front that all governments to explore and implement other legal means of domestication of this law, the Ecocide law, through various avenues such as recognizing the full rights of nature, upholding the recently added right to the United Nations for citizens and species to have a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, ensuring the right of the youth, the children, and future generations to inherit a livable, sustainable planet free from ecocidal acts and massive deforestation, ocean destruction, dangerous and overexploitative and unreplenishable mining activities, both on terrestrial and marine areas of the Earth. We call on all businesses, civil society organizations, activists, and even individuals to center their demand strategies and even policies to have inclines towards the youth, environmental protection, and more so the ecocide law in all their different working contexts to achieve the end goal of protecting life and life of Earth. Finally, in regards to indigenous peoples, who especially make up most of the communities in Africa, the governments, organizations, civil societies, and all parties respect their rights as demanded by the United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples, not only towards them, but also their lands. The inclusion of their traditions and knowledge in key policies among states, protection and inclusion of their sustainable ecosystems and livelihoods, and finally, their full participation and representation in all decision-making tables. We will not be silent or silenced on this and more of our demands to aim to protect our lives or even give us life. We refuse to be excluded from critical environmental decision-making tables and/or processes. The voices of the youth can no longer be ignored. We are fighting on the same side of this climate war, the side of life, the side of Earth. Only that this time and henceforth, we are the ones leading. So thank you so much for listening to my intervention, and I hope we have a fruitful discussion about the linkages of ecocide across all generations. And I'll pass it over to Leah to continue the moderation for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Debbie, for that introduction to today on Earth Day. And I know for all of us fighting for climate justice, for rights of nature, for ecocide, for our future, for life on Earth on all fronts, Earth Day is every day. But today is an opportunity to once again look at the structures of our system that need to be challenged. And I'm really, really excited to have with me today such a wonderful panel. And I'm Leah. I'm together with Debbie co-leading Youth for Ecocide Law, tuning in from University of Cambridge today. And I think it's a really critical, important discussion that we look at how our current legal system, our current rights system, are inherently structured in an anthropocentric way that sees humans at the top of the legal order without recognizing the life systems on which we depend. And I think in that regard, rights of nature and ecocide law are connected through their more ecocentric approach, through recognizing that humans are not at the top. We are part of an ecosystem, and without a livable planet, we cannot sustain our lives and our livelihoods and our current laws even. So without much further ado, I am really excited to host today's panel on discussing the interlinkages between and the synergies between rights of nature and ecocide law. And I will give you a short introduction to our wonderful panelists in no particular order, but starting with the wonderful Rafa, who grew up in Ecuador, where she early on discovered her love for Mother Earth and passion for rights of nature. She's been involved in the rights of nature movement, mostly through the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, also known as GAN, particularly in the International Rights of Nature tribunals in Paris and Bonn, as well as helping organize the International Rights of Nature Symposium to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the rights of nature in Ecuador. She holds a BA in Environmental Studies and International Affairs from Skidmore College in New York, and in 2017, Rafa studied in New Zealand, where she learned and researched more about the voice of nature and the rights of the Whanganui River. Today, she lives in New York City, where she, along with her peers, founded the GAN Youth Hub and continues to be part of the movement by serving as the GAN Global Hub Coordinator. And yes, thank you for being here with us today, Rafa. Next, I will introduce Pella, Pella is a maverick ecologist, farmer, author, and educator. She's co-founder of Transition Sweden and Ecocide Sweden and Rights of Nature Sweden. She's a knowledge expert in UN Harmony of Nature program. These are one-year ecopsychology program and is an associate of the Center for Environment and Development Studies in Uppsala University. Pella received the Swedish Martin Luther King Award in 2023 and was appointed the Environmental Hero of the Year in 2019. She loves being in touch with the soil and all the inhabitants of her small holding in the archipelago of Stockholm. And Pella, it's wonderful to have you here with us today and to have such a synergy of rights of nature and ecocide law come together through you as well. So very excited to hear your thoughts and in our discussion today. Next, I'm going to introduce Amelie. Amelie is a queer rights advocate, tree planter, environmental activist, podcaster, and student based in Canada. They have been involved in the Stop Ecocide movement since 2021, when they became a youth ambassador for Stop Ecocide Canada. Subsequently, they founded Stop Ecocide Toronto, the movement's first city level chapter, and from 2022 to 2024, they helped launch and grow Youth for Ecocide Law as one of the network's first co-leads. Volunteering in the Stop Ecocide movement, Amelie has run petitions to the Canadian government, coordinated worldwide events, spoken at international conferences, and really excited to hear from her today and from Amelie today on these topics. So thank you for being here. Finally, last but not least, I'd like to introduce Quetzal. Was born and raised in New York City, moved to SoCal for a graduate program at the SoCal University of America. They graduated from the MA Educational Leadership Program in May 2023, and their research and thesis work focused on climate justice, indigenous liberation, and the rights of nature. The thesis focused on the intersectionality of how rights of nature and earth are foundational for the liberation of indigenous people, and thus spearheading a harmonious coexisting with all living beings. Quetzal joined the GAN Youth Hub in January 2024 as the communications facilitator. Apart from their continuing their MA research, they also have research on critical global ethnic studies and value creation pedagogy. So that is an introduction to the wonderful panel, who I'm sure will also add more on what they do, and I'm really, really excited. Hopefully you're excited to learn from them as well, to have that discussion. We also invite you to ask any questions in the chat and in the Q&A, and we'll leave some time at the end, hopefully, to answer a lot of them. Probably won't have time for all, but we'll try our very best. So let's start by diving into today's question. And I'd really like to start with just giving an introduction to both these topics, specifically for listeners that might be tuning in for the first time, hearing about what ecocide law or rights of nature means. So I'd like to invite Amelie to talk about what ecocide law is and why we need an international law on ecocide.
Yeah, absolutely. Is my audio working well? Perfect. So yeah, as you heard, I'm Amelie. I co-led the Youth for Ecocide Law Network for a couple of years, and I've been doing other things in the movement. So I'll try to keep this brief, but basically I want to give a quick introduction to ecocide and why it's important and why it's needed right now. So as you heard from Debbie, ecocide refers to mass environmental destruction, essentially the worst harms against the natural world. And I think that means very different things to different people, but things that are often brought up, or negligence leading to massive oil spills, mass deforestation of critical biodiversity habitats, things like that. Right now, in most of the world, these things are not criminal offenses. So if somebody is negligent or intentionally causes this mass environmental destruction, and they know it's going to happen and it's devastating, they still can't be held accountable under criminal law in much of the world. And the basic premise of the Stop Ecocide movement is That needs to change. We need to prevent environmental destruction by naming the worst harms against the world as crimes. So in 2017, Stop Ecocide International was founded. This is an idea that's been around for a long time. I think the first known use of the word was to describe the Vietnam War and the use of Agent Orange by the American military. But so for decades, scholars have been bringing up how we could potentially criminalize ecocide. And one of the people who started bringing this forward was the Scottish barrister Polly Higgins. And so she started working on how this could become international criminal law with Jojo Mehta, the current executive director of Stop Ecocide International. And they founded this movement to make ecocide a fifth crime at the International Criminal Court, the ICC. Currently, the court tries 4 crimes, so genocide, crimes against humanity, crimes of aggression, and crimes against humanity. But we want to add ecocide. Essentially, these current crimes don't address mass destruction of the natural world, but it is an international court. And so that means is that there are 124 states that are part of the court. When a new crime is added, states that sign on then have an obligation to also implement it in their domestic laws, and it becomes this international crime, which means that we advocated for it at an international level so that it will be a crime in countries around the world, and then on an international stage for any perpetrators who aren't able to be tried in their home countries. But the basic kind of way that I describe this is, imagine how hard it would be to advocate for human rights if, I don't know, killing wasn't illegal. Imagine how difficult it would be to actually fight for the preservation of human life if it weren't illegal to end it. Well, that's the problem we have today with the environment. There's no law that says the worst harms against it are crimes. And so, yeah, we've made a ton of progress in the past couple of years. Since Stop Ecocide International was founded, Stop Ecocide Foundation brought together a panel of independent experts from around the world to actually define what specifically it would mean in law. And the definition we're working with right now is ecocide refers to unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts, which is a mouthful, but it essentially means severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment should be a crime. And in terms of progress, since this movement was founded under a decade ago, there has been a ton. So the first kind of states to come on board for this were small island developing states like Vanuatu and Kiribati, states that are going to be massively impacted by environmental destruction causing climate change. Today, it's being taken up by countries around the world, and I hope I'll get into this later. But really, this is attractive to people because it's not only a legal solution to environmental destruction. It's not only there to try people who cause it. It's also there to set this kind of moral red line where we say, no, it's unacceptable to destroy our home. It's unacceptable to create a situation where future generations don't have a livable planet. Right now, we are passing threshold after threshold in terms of biodiversity loss and climate change and resource depletion. And something needs to shift. And part of that shift needs to be, we agree that a livable planet is the baseline for all life, for all human rights, and for all futures. And ecocide law is part of that. And so working with the Youth Network, that was something that really was attractive to people around the world, because not only is it a law that could be put in place, it's also an agreement by governments that they're going to hold themselves accountable, that key officials are going to not massively destroy the earth, they're not going to make decisions that end our futures. And for me, that's the really exciting part of ecocide law, because in that way, we're aiming to prevent environmental destruction before it even occurs and stop those kind of worst harms. And it works really well with rights of nature. I'm sure we'll get into that later. I don't want to take away from anybody else's talking points, so I'll stop there.
Thank you very much for that very comprehensive but brief introduction. Emily, I'm going to pass over to Rafa to introduce the Rights of Nature movement.
Thank you so much, Leah and Emily. I think it was wonderful to start with your amazing energy and your words. I think I'm already inspired. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Rafaela. As Leah mentioned, I'm from Ecuador. I'm currently based in the ancestral lands of the Lenape people, moderately known as New York City. And I'm here to talk a little bit about rights of nature. How do we put such a complex and new and inspiring movement in very easy terms as well. And I think for that, the people that have spoke before me have touched on how current environmental laws and legal systems are rooted in flawed narratives and assumptions. They are rooted in human-centric values, objectives, and standards. They fail to sustain and regenerate life, and they create this dangerous human relationship with nature, one of which humans are owners of nature and have this relationship of exploitation. And we can see currently in our legal systems, corporations have rights, states have rights, humans have rights, but nature doesn't. And nature doesn't have basically a seat at the table at courts and in our current legal systems. And rights of nature looks to change that. So what is rights of nature, and how do we see rights of nature as a true paradigm shift? Rights of nature is a legal framework, and it's a global movement, and also it's a cultural shift. It is rooted in indigenous cosmology, honoring this deep interrelation of all life and these interconnections that if we do something to nature, nature is probably not going to be able to regenerate. This is also a movement that considers future generations and that respects future generations as well, not only of humans, but also of other forms of life. The rights of nature movement is often referred to as inspired by Christopher Stone's book, Should Trees Have Standing, from 1972. And it has taken a little bit for it to take off. We've seen how the first case of rights of nature was in 2006, and it was a regional ordinance in Tobacco Borough in Pennsylvania. And in 2008, it was implemented as part of the Ecuadorian Constitution. And after that, we've seen how it has slowly taken off. But I like to say that I think after the pandemic, it's really when rights of nature has gained a lot of force. And I think it's partly because we've realized that nature without us is doing totally okay. If we're sick, nature is thriving. But if nature is sick, humans are not going to be thriving. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Rights of nature considers nature as a living entity and as a being rather than as a property or a resource. I think we often hear this discourse of natural resources, and I like to move away from that term because once you put a resource next to nature, it means it's something that's there to be used. And we need to move away from that because nature has inherent rights to exist, persist, and regenerate its vital cycles. And my mentor and colleague, Natty Green, always uses this analogy of rights of nature as seeing Earth as a human body, where if you cut a human's arm, it's not going to grow back up. And that is what rights of nature is trying to prevent. It's that, yeah, we can have a bruise and that's going to heal and it's going to regenerate. But once you cut a part or some of a human's arm, then that's not going to grow. And I think that's putting rights of nature in very simple terms, something that people can understand, because often we hear, oh, but will rocks have rights, or we will not be able to develop. And I think we will be able to develop in a regenerative way because we need to move away from the current economic systems that are failing us and are failing to sustain future forms of life. So this is what a little bit about what the rights of nature is. Another thing that I love about the rights of nature is that it doesn't have a one-size-fits-all approach. It is not implemented in the same way across the world. And this allows the movement to be creative under, because we do live under political boundaries that have different rules. And so the rights of nature movement has proven to be able to mold differently in different parts of the world. One of these is community organizing, as I mentioned. This would be the case of regional ordinances like the Tobacco Borough case in the US in 2006. There's also the constitutional approach. And here we see Ecuador. Ecuador is used often as an example of the rights of nature as implementing it in its constitution. And it's taken a while. It's been over 15 years of the rights of nature in the Ecuadorian constitution. And yeah, we have seen positive cases, and now more and more it's keeping track because lawyers are learning this new tool. It is a new concept. It is a new tool that for the current environmental lawyers and other lawyers, it's a foreign idea. So we do have a lot of work to do with judges and with lawyers as well. Another hopeful case of rights of nature and constitutional approaches is Aruba. Aruba is currently considering including or amending their constitution to include the rights of nature. There's also indigenous governance approach, and this we see in the case of rights of nature in New Zealand in the Whanganui River, and also in the Ponca Nation in the US, them officially including rights of nature. And there's also the judicial approach, and we've seen this approach in different parts of the world, such as in Colombia with the Atrato River and over 20 other rivers that have rights, the Colombian Amazon, also in the Philippines. So we see this movement growing. And as I said, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, but rather it is a very creative movement that works in harmony also with ecocide law. And I don't know if I mentioned, but rights of nature, it is included in over 35 countries and in more than 20 of them in one form of law or another. So I think I just want to get started here. I do want to send in the chat, I have gathered a few links where you can follow the advances of the rights of nature. The Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature has a map where you see the different parts of the world being colored through the years on how rights of nature has been evolving. We also have the Jurisprudence Monitor that you can follow all the initiatives of rights of nature in there. There's a UN Harmony with Nature program. They have a page of the chronology of the rights of nature. And I also wanted to send the link to this white paper created by Movement Rights Weekend and the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature for COP28, which frames the rights of nature as a real solution to the climate crisis. And it has most recent updates of rights of nature. So it is framed really beautifully. So I'm just going to leave it there, and I'm sure we can go more into different cases of rights of nature and things that have inspired me personally as a young person in the movement. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. There's definitely a lot of ground to cover, and it's inspiring to see rights of nature movement across the world take off and it being adopted, this ecocentric approach is being adopted in a very anthropocentric world, which obviously has its challenges, but it's very inspiring to see it take root and spreading across the world. So that brings me to Kwetsa, to you, to ask us to explain a little bit more the interlinkages between rights of nature and indigenous rights, and how they are connected, and why. Yes, and how, what different it really makes is to recognize rights of nature in the law, specifically with connection to indigenous rights.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Rafa. Thank you, Amelia, for all that everyone has shared so far. Yeah, I'm Ketsa. I live in California on Yoka territory, which is like near Sequoia National Park, if you know where that is. And yeah, I'm from Lenape, New York City. And yeah, I think I want to preface my response with saying that I'm speaking of my own experience and not for all indigenous people across the globe, because I think that happens way too often and causes some of this harmony and misinformation on what indigenous people want and don't want. And I've been fortunate enough to participate in different ceremonial spaces and indigenous spaces in Peru, in on Turtle Island. And for those that don't know, Turtle Island is considered North America, in the global south, or the relatives down south in Bolivia and Mexico. So, you know, indigenous knowledge and indigenous traditions vary. Like Rafa was saying, that, like, you know, the rights of nature is not, it looks differently across the globe, and so indigenous traditions also look differently depending on where you are on planet Earth. And so I think that the biggest thing, or that I've learned over the last couple of years, is that indigenous people believe that they are the land, that they're an extension of Mother Earth, and that they are not separate at all. And I think that that's what really inspired me when I got involved in the rights of nature. It's just like how that philosophical, you know, paradigm shift of relating to the land kind of needs to happen first, before you can kind of just like ecocide law and rights of nature just make sense, right? Like if you don't I think if when I reflect back, if I didn't have that like switch of like just seeing how we are connected to the animal relatives, to the plant relatives, to the natural elements, the sky, the land, the earth, the water, and through ceremony, through indigenous ceremony, I think this becomes very apparent. You know, it's a practice because those of us who've grown in the Western world need to like unlearn certain things that kind of bring us back to harmony with Mother Earth. And so if indigenous rights are equally as important as the rights of nature, then therefore I strongly believe that they have to happen at the same time. That one can't come first, and one can't happen without the other. And fortunately, I was in a beautiful meeting last week with Rafa in New York City, where you know, someone brought up the example of like sometimes the rights of nature movement can do so well, and yet the indigenous people of that territory don't have as many the same rights. And like, wouldn't that be an interesting situation where we give Mother Earth rights first before the indigenous people of that territory? And so those are good questions about like, you know, how to navigate the synchronicity and the linkages inherently with indigenous people and the rights of nature. And so I think because how Rafa said that like this is brand new, or a very brand new concept for many people across the world. I think we're finding that like in the rights of nature solutions, indigenous people are going to be the people that take care of the earth in the local context. And so therefore you can't have, or I strongly believe that you can't like advance further on the rights of nature. And I think I'll touch upon this in my maybe later on in another question. But that human rights, indigenous rights, you know, we have the UN who created a whole declaration for indigenous people, and yet indigenous people on the front lines are demanding like land back. They're asking for protections, you know, from assassinations, from, you know, being targeted by oil industries, by large corporations that want to extract their land. And so if indigenous people are clearly asking for this, and you know, I think this is just like a beautiful challenge that we have to go through. Like, why aren't indigenous people being listened to if their demands and their asks are very clear? You know, they want to protect the Amazon forest, they want to protect the water, they want to protect the ecosystems, they want to protect their people, they want to kind of have their traditions and their culture live on. And so therefore, what is stopping governments or nations, or you know, the globe from listening to them? And then, you know, we have this like rights of nature movement coming from underneath, you know, in this at this time that's taking, I think, gaining a lot of ground, at least from what I feel. But I know that maybe we're like in echo chambers at times. So I'm trying to, you know, be very hopeful. But I do feel like there's a big movement coming. And I think indigenous people are excited about it because they see a lot of allyship. They see a lot of other non-indigenous people or I mean, we're all indigenous to somewhere, but they see a lot of people not like, you know, living on the land, or like not living down on territories, or in the South, or throughout Turtle Island. They're seeing a lot of allyship and a lot of good work coming from these organizations like Stop Ecocide and Rights of Nature. And there's other local organizations and local community organizations that have been built around these principles, these ethos, this like constitution, right? I think we're trying to create an Earth constitution. And so I think if we clearly share that and we're trying to come in a good way with indigenous people, I think it makes the world of difference in terms of hope for like the earth to actually, or our politics and our structures and our frameworks of governance are actually listening to and being more aligned with an eco-centered approach, which is inherent in indigenous communities. So to answer like that second part of your question, what would it mean? I think it would mean everything. It would mean the change of, you know, history as we know it, because indigenous people have this knowledge already that it's just kind of inherent. And I think it's us that are waking up to be aligned with that knowledge system and that like philosophy and that way of life. And so it would mean everything. It would mean everything. There is nothing like I think bigger than like everyone like being synchronized into protecting the earth and taking care of the land and being in good relation to each other. So yeah, I think I'm gonna pause there because I think it's a pretty good pause. Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone's so hyping me so up. This is so exciting. Bella, I'll pass it on to you to yes, maybe explain a little bit more, how do you see the synergies between rights of nature and ecocide law, specifically since we've heard a little bit about each movement and sort of the underlying approaches to it.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's such a great way to celebrate Earth Day with all of you tuning in from various parts of the world. And I think Amelie also said something about this, but that actually, you know, if nature has rights, there has to be frameworks to protect those rights. There has to be, like, if we know that humans have rights, but murder wasn't a crime, then what would those rights mean? So that's the role of criminal law. And I really love how also several of you said that this is that rights of nature is a very diverse, very complex response. And it's also a response in an emergency, as Debbie said in the introduction. And if we have an emergency, that's also a place of emergence. And both of those, ecocide law and rights of nature, they're really taking this time that we are living through seriously, saying that we have to go deep. We have to rethink deeply the assumptions that we are making and how we are viewing the world. And that's what we are doing. And the assumption, as you said also in the beginning, Leah, the anthropocentric assumption that we are making, that's really not any idea. It's a fundamental idea in the Western culture. So by proposing a different idea, that's really some paradigm shifting. And that's what both of those are doing. While rights of nature is sort of the big paradigm shift when we shift the way we see the world, ecocide law is a very specific legal innovation in a very specific institution, the International Criminal Court. So to me, that's really thrilling and interesting, because you don't have to make the paradigm shift inherent in rights of nature to believe that ecocide law is really an important thing making sense. So you can still keep, I mean, if you find that rights of nature is difficult, which we do in our society, you can still think that, well, I understand that humans need healthy ecosystems, so we have to protect those for humans. And in that way, ecocide law becomes a stepping stone. It becomes a bridge, bridging those paradigms, leading towards the deeper understanding that is inherent in rights of nature. And while that has to be like diverse and creative and locally anchored, we can still say that, well, we can agree on a global scale, on an international scale, by this very basic principle: first, do no harm. Like, don't cut the arm, because it will not grow back. So mass damage and destruction of nature should just be illegal. It should be a major crime. And that's a really powerful way of both influencing our collective values, institutionalizing the understanding that nature is important and valuable, but it's also a very powerful way of shifting our collective, well, basically, you know, just decision making, responsibility, and resources towards more healthy behaviors. Yeah, well, something like that.
Thank you very much. I think that's a really wonderful way sort of to frame it all, and also to highlight that, you know, ecocide law could be that bridge, because it's not fully ecocentric in the way that rights of nature are, but that could also be a powerful tool in helping bridge the system towards a more ecocentric law, because it includes crime. It includes in its premises also rights of nature, especially where they have already been enacted. And I know we've already talked a little bit about, Rafa, you already mentioned a few places where there've been successful initiatives that are quite well known. I don't know if you want to highlight one or two more quickly, but maybe also, you know, some of the challenges that come with the rights of nature movement as well, and how that's been addressed.
Thanks, Leah. Yeah, I would love to highlight one of the cases that I've been recently very inspired by. But I also, before going into this case specifically, I do think now that we're talking from youth, there have been a few cases coming from youth, especially in the Colombian Amazon. The case of recognizing the rights of the Colombian Amazon came from an initiative of children not having their human rights being met because they didn't have access to a health environment. So this is also a connection in which we can often work around rights of nature while upholding human rights and indigenous people's rights. And as Keta mentioned, I do think that it is important to always keep in mind that we should be using rights of nature, but not only going that route, we do need to keep track of other rights that are not being met. And also Pela mentioned, I mean, humans have rights, but are they respected? Not necessarily. So this is, it's been a long road, and I think it will be. But I do think we are seeing advances. We are seeing wins for the rights of nature, for ecocide law. And this is something that we should celebrate, while also learning from different cases that are going on around the world. And I think that's the power of these global movements, is to share and to grow the community and share experiences so that we can have more wins in different parts of the world. So I wanted to go into this the case of Intag in Ecuador, in the Imbabura province of Ecuador. It is a community that has been fighting copper mining for about 30 years. And recently, last year, they won a case where this tiny little frog, and I'm going to share my screen so that you see the picture, because every time I see it, it makes me so happy. It is loading. Let me know when you can see my screen. Can you see it now? So in Intag, there was this case on trying to revoke the mining license of Codelco. It's one of the biggest mining companies in Chile, where it's in a region where there are these twin falls, and there has been research on the endemic species that live there. It's a biodiversity hotspot and one of the most biodiverse places on Earth. And this group of scientists were able to rediscover two species of frogs that were believed to be extinct, one of them being this one, and it was renamed as the resistance rocket frog. It is a tiny little frog, and just for me, thinking about the concept of the frog taking this massive mining company to court is just an amazing concept. And one of my friends, after talking about this case with her, she made this collage, and I think it captures rights of nature and this idea of mining with frogs going to court and being these actors in court. And this is the most, I think a powerful thing of rights of nature is that, yes, nature has partners, nature has allies that are helping it come and be present at the courts. And this case was positive for the frogs and for the community of Intag. Another example of rights of nature working alongside indigenous peoples and local community rights, where the case was successful because there was a violation of the rights of nature and the rights of these frogs that are endemic to that waterfall, but also it was recognized that there wasn't appropriate free, prior, and informed consent for the local communities living in Intag. So it is using both frameworks of human rights and also of rights of nature to win successful cases. I encourage you all to read a little bit more about the Intag case, and I'm going to drop a link in the chat that talks a little bit more about the case. But I did want to share this collage because I do think it captures the rights of nature and what we're trying to do with the movement here.
Thank you so much for sharing that story and that case. And I really encourage everyone to check out your incredible resources that you link. These are really, really great. And yes, next I want to ask Amelie to speak a little bit about some developments that have been happening in the ecocide law field. Well, maybe we'll also take, as it quite fits a little bit with what we're discussing at the moment, one of the questions that are arisen in the Q&A, which is also about, what challenges does Stop Ecocide face in the goal for advocating for ecocide law in international law, and why are some countries, such as the United States, critical of the inclusion? What are sort of some of the concerns around that? How can we bygo that? But also actually to share maybe in combination with that some of the success stories that are happening, because I think just, as Rafa shared some of what's happening in rights of nature, I think it's always incredible to see, some people think that, these are just ideas that are being debated on a conceptual level, but no, these are actual happenings that are taking place and that are changing the face of law. So, Amelie, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like quickly, I guess it relates a little bit to your question, but I wanted to bounce off a couple of things that the other speakers had said. So one of the questions that I often get asked, and this is a bit of a challenge in conceptualizing ecocide law, is, what sorts of cases could be tried? Like, how do you determine who is responsible for mass environmental destruction? How do you pinpoint that? And Kwetsa, you were talking a little bit about the criminalization of land defenders. So this is like something that often makes it really clear when I discuss it. So I come from so-called Canada, where we face a lot of repression against Indigenous land defenders who are resisting extractive projects. One of the ongoing cases that's really prevalent in Canada is that there is a pipeline being built by TC Energy that is being resisted by a lot of Indigenous land defenders, specifically from the Wet'suwet'en Nation. And many of those land defenders are now on trial for being on their traditional territories and trying to stop a pipeline. At the same time as that, the companies that are causing massive environmental destruction to build this pipeline, the people making decisions to authorize mass environmental destruction and to violate Indigenous rights are not being held accountable. Actually, they're getting paid millions. And so that kind of inequality and injustice really makes it clear why our current legal system is not working. And I was really glad you brought that up, because it's a case that speaks to a lot of people in so-called Canada. And so I often bring that up. I was also at a meeting the other week with a bunch of other Indigenous land defenders from different nations across so-called Canada, and we were talking about the right to water. And one thing that often surprises people is that in Canada, we actually have a ton of unsafe water advisories that have been ongoing for years. And most of those, I'm not sure if it is all of them, but almost all, if not all of them, are in Indigenous reserves. Which means that we have a drinking water crisis of unsafe drinking water in Indigenous communities across Canada. This is not the case in white communities. It is not the case in cities. But in many cases, one really good example is the community of Grassy Narrows in Northern Ontario. These unsafe drinking water advisories can be traced back to industrial facilities that are dumping or that are using unsafe standards of practice and that are causing mass environmental destruction with human ramifications. And in that way, I think it just really clearly ties how like Indigenous rights and rights of nature are very intertwined, because the destruction of the natural world always disproportionately impacts Indigenous communities, whether it's in so-called Canada, whether it's anywhere else around the world. So that's what I wanted to quickly tie in. But in terms of updates in the Stop Ecocide movement, I'll go into a quick couple of those, and then I'll talk a little bit about resistance to the idea that's been coming up for me a little bit lately, because I do a lot of the work in so-called Canada, and there is a little resistance here. But in the past year, this is something that has absolutely skyrocketed in terms of international support. Part of the reason for this, I think, is that people around the world are feeling the urgency of environmental issues. I mean, we're almost at 2025. If you're going to talk about climate urgency, this is a critical year in so many reports that people are like, oh, we need to do this by 2025. Those things are not happening. Same thing with biodiversity thresholds. Often the year that we talk about is 2030. That will only be 5 years away once we hit 2025. And so people are feeling the urgency of solving environmental issues. And in some cases, that is translating into more appetite to actually pursue things like ecocide law. So the biggest one recently is that the European Union, most recently, or the European Council formally adopted a new European crime directive. that includes crimes comparable to ecocide. Now, this has been really, really big for the movement because it means that countries in the EU are going to have an obligation to implement legislation that criminalizes crimes comparable to ecocide. And so it means that this entire group of states is now moving forward to align their legislation in a way where it would be amenable if we were to make ecocide an international crime as well. And so this is a whole group of states that are more likely to now support it as an international crime. Beyond that, we're seeing a ton of countries individually starting to bring this forward as domestic legislation. So from Belgium to Brazil, from Chile to the Netherlands, you're seeing ecocide bills being brought forward by specific parties, by the government, and so on. We're also seeing a ton of support from places that I didn't actually expect to see support when I first started a couple of years back with the movement. So things like Triodos Bank in Europe has come out in support of criminalizing ecocide. The International Corporate Governance Network that comprises asset managers worth trillions of dollars have come out in support. And people are feeling this urgency. Working with the Youth Network, groups around the world are starting to support this, to want to work with us, and to actively say, how can we make this reality in our context and at an international level? So just in that sense, there's a ton of energy. One other update I was given is that recently the International Criminal Court's Office of the Chief Prosecutor did a public consultation with academics, other experts, civil society members, and overwhelmingly, the feedback they got back, this consultation was about how to incorporate environmental crimes into their work, was that we need a fifth crime at the International Criminal Court and we need it to cover ecocide. And so that's really exciting because we're not only seeing this at a country level, we're not only seeing this at a grassroots level, we're also seeing this at the level of the ICC, of the Chief Prosecutor's Office. We're also seeing this from UN officials like the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights who are coming out in support. So those are all great things. So much movement there. I would say that in terms of challenges, to respond to the question in the chat, is that there is still some hesitancy from states that have, I guess, a little bit of a complicated political context internally. I'll give the example that I'm really familiar with because I do a lot of political lobbying on this in so-called Canada. There's a little bit of hesitancy because Canada is an extractive economy, and a lot of politicians have a little bit of fear that this is going to impact them politically, that this is going to impact their economy. And obviously that's from a mindset where economy is tied to extraction and good living standards are tied to extraction. And that's something that is, well, I'm hoping to challenge, and I think the Rights of Nature movement also hopes to challenge, to say, you know, we need to value nature, not just as natural resources. But there is that kind of ingrained mindset. And so when I'm going into meetings in Canada, one of the things that you really have to convince a lot of politicians of is, how is this not going to impact you politically? And so it always reminds me that when you get down to the nitty gritty, a lot of the progress on this is being determined by things happening in very specific political context at a local level. And that always reminds me of like the very clear necessity of local level teams doing this work to raise awareness, to meet those questions, to mobilize grassroots support, because we would not be getting as far as we are if we didn't have people on the grassroots level actually challenging when you do come up with that resistance among more hesitant governments. It's really easy for countries that are being massively impacted by the system we're living in to say, we need an ecocide law. It's going to be harder to get a country like Canada that is benefiting from environmental destruction, that houses the majority of the world's mining companies, to sign on to this. But I do think that we're going to win. It's just going to take a lot of people joining us and standing up and saying it's time that something needs to shift. Because we don't have time to wait around. And it is happening right now. We have a petition to the Canadian government. We're having tons of signatures from around the country. We're having groups come to us and say, how can we reshare this? And so I'm starting to see that kind of shift in terms of grassroots support. But I do think that in terms of that question, we need to be working at both the high level and we need to be talking with communities that are actually impacted. We need to be working everywhere on the grassroots level. I don't know if anybody else would add anything to that. I'd love to hear what other people have to say, but I'll wrap up there so other people have time.
Thank you. I think that's a great call also on Earth Day to encourage anyone listening, you know, to get involved in grassroots action. I think that's one of the ways that, you know, it's hard work, but it's so important because we can't get the high level political decisions without people on the ground that are pushing for it and creating change. I know we don't have that much time on the clock, but I do really want to give everyone a chance to to speak some more on this exciting topic. So I'm going to ask the next two questions to keep them just very brief. But Kretsen, I want to call on you again to speak a little bit about how can we ensure that the frameworks of sort of ecocentric / earth-centric laws are not merely symbolic, but actually have a tangible impact on environmental protection and restoration. Also seeing, you know, a lot of these statements that are being made can be quite symbolic, specifically with rights of nature, and could probably benefit with some stronger laws behind them. But I wanted to sort of hear your thoughts and your opinions on that, and how can we ensure that that really is taken seriously.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for everyone that continues to share just beautiful, beautiful responses. I think what I'm feeling is that, you know, there's a lot of greenwashing these days. There's a lot of like fake activism, fake green support. You know, I think a company can just like, you know, make something like half more recyclable, and they can like get like this branding of like being green or being more sustainable, etc. And even in my paper, my recent paper, my master's thesis, I criticize a lot of the sustainability language just because, like, you know, the UN has said sustainable future for so long, and yet everything keeps getting delayed about like when this sustainable future is coming. So it's kind of just like, you know, or it's like a playful critique. You know, it's like, okay, like what does this actually mean? What does a truly sustainable future mean, and when are we gonna get there? And, you know, ask those critical questions. And so I think that like when you as we build these movements of rights of nature, ecocide, and everything that comes from there, I think that, like, you know, there's a lot of organizations doing this beautiful work. I think it's important to have indigenous representation. I think those of us that grow up in the Western world or grow up like disconnected from our ancestral lands or our traditions and stuff are prone to not think or kind of, you know, bring in other frameworks that maybe are better supported with people who are really close to the land, as we also learn about like ways that we unlearn and what we learned growing up. And just to clarify that, like, I mean that as we grow up, we take in a lot of information about the world and how it is, and indigenous people just know that, you know, everything has to be in harmony. So there's like intuitive knowing. And so with indigenous representation on your team, on these big, you know, these big movements, ecocide law and rights of nature and everything in between and everything that comes out of that, it's just important because I think indigenous people will always hold people accountable. You know, even if people don't listen, indigenous people will tell you the truth, and they'll tell you, you know, that's still colonial, or that's still profit centered, or that's still like, you know, gonna cause some extraction, or they'll tell you the truth if you allow them to. Because I think that there is a lot of like, you know, sometimes, you know, fake activism that, like, you know, gets in the way of true liberation, of true peace, of true you know, transformation of our society. And then the last thing I want to say is kind of like DEI, like diversity, equity, inclusion. You can't have DEI without like Black and brown folks in the space, right? I think it's like institutions like struggle with this a lot because they definitely want like more diversity, more inclusion, more equity. But what does that actually look like? You need to have Black and brown folks in the space. And now I think that looks different for every context, depending on where where you're from, and like what the student population is, what is, you know, the general like background population of folks. But I think it's like, this is like what has happened, like in terms of the US, like, you know, has a long history of slavery, of like extraction, of genocide against the indigenous people of this country first. And yet we still haven't really heard the United States, or I don't know how long it will take for them to acknowledge that like really dark history, because it doesn't paint the beautiful picture of what everyone likes to perceive America or the US to be. But I think similar to the rights of nature, or at least this is how I can make the connection, is that we just need to be honest that these systems of extraction do not like showcase how we all feel, right? And that like the people in charge of these practices need to acknowledge those, you know, dark histories, and also be willing to make, you know, dramatic changes to kind of live in coexistence with what everyone really wants. Is like, everyone wants to have a home, everyone wants to have a sustainable life, and everyone wants their kids to be taken care of and have, you know, that future here on planet Earth. So I think I want to say more, but I'm gonna just pause right there. So thank you.
Thank you. I know we could talk so much more on all of this. I'm going to ask the final question to Pella, to just, being involved in both movements, in both rights of nature and ecocide law. How do you see, how can the movements be better allies and to each other, to support each other? Maybe just as a little inspiration for the go and how we can work better together, because I think in general a lot of these connections between environmental movements exist, but the times are just getting more and more critical in terms of climate change, in terms of environmental destruction, and we need to figure out ways how we can better support each other and create a strong voice for change.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I want to bring you back to, I was visiting the Department of Foreign Affairs at the governmental level in Sweden, like the highest civil servant, and with two of the elders in the Rights of Nature movement. So Patricia Goalinga from Sarajevo in Ecuador, and Cormac Cullinan from South Africa. And so we wanted to speak about rights of nature. And we were quite surprised when the person we met was so positive towards everything we said. And she was like, she was from the Green Party. And she was like, yeah, and what do you want me to do? And we were a bit dumbfounded, because what could she do in her position? And then actually to get Sweden and the government of Sweden behind ecocide as an international crime, that's like the one thing that she could do, because to work for rights of nature from the Minister of Foreign Affairs, it's not really politically feasible. So that's how I think we have to me, it's always about how to hack the institutions. How can we use the inbuilt power of those colonial destructive institutions towards a better future? And that's what ecocide law does on a very high level. And also the rights of nature, many of the idea of rights of nature is actually a very basic idea. Like, it's not very sophisticated. It's just saying that, well, not just humans, but everything that is alive has the right to be alive and thrive. And to answer also the question here in the Q&A section, I think to make both of those ideas be constructive all the time and not destructive, because they can certainly become destructive, is to say that these are just steps in a deepening relationship with the living world. So ecocide law isn't just we do this and everything is okay. Rights of nature is not we do this and everything is okay. We have to keep understanding and learning about what it really means to be a human in a harmonious relationship with each other and with everything that's alive. And that takes much more. Like, that takes the ritual that Ketsa also spoke about. So just to understand that this is a process, I think is important.
Thank you. I think that's a wonderful question to end on. I want to ask, though, in really just one statement from each panelist about a message that you would like to share with the audience, both tuning in today, but also who will listen to the recording later. One message that you have today for them, and I will start by handing it to Rafael.
Thank you so much, Leah. I am already so inspired. So thank you all for your words. I think just very, very short. I think people are always asking, how can I get involved? How can I implement rights of nature in my circles and in my movements? And I think it starts with the way in which we refer to nature and our language, our day-to-day language. And maybe I would recommend people to go back and look at your mission and look at the vision of your organization and see if it's human-centric, if it considers nature and all other ways of life, and just including those and changing the way in which we communicate can make a huge change already. And so I think that would be my only recommendation here, and also an encouragement for people to join the movement. The Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature has hubs that don't require you to be an expert on rights of nature, You can join a hub, regional, local. We have a youth hub, we have a legal hub, we have a hub for academics. And we have hubs in almost all regions of the world where you can join and become an active member, learn, propose ideas, and get expert advice on certain rights of nature topics. So it's just an invitation for everybody. I'm gonna drop another link on the chat, and I'm also gonna drop my email. If you have any questions, I'm always happy to chat.
Thank you. Amelie, you're next.
Yeah, I am someone who has some problems with the way Earth Day is celebrated now, because I think it's quite often used as a forum for greenwashing and for doing kind of tangential actions about the environment that make companies look good, that make us feel better, but that don't actually challenge systems. So I would encourage people to do something today that challenges a system of power that is causing environmental damage, to engage with something that is a little bit more difficult, but learn about an issue and learn about root causes of environmental destruction. And I think it's really beautiful to do this webinar on Earth Day because it's a way of rethinking what Earth Day means. It's not about temporary fixes like changing your light bulbs to make them more energy efficient. Earth Day needs to be about protecting the Earth. And let's get back to what that means in your local context. If anybody's based in Canada, I'm just going to send the petition we're running to the Canadian government, or if you have any allies in Canada, because that's one thing that I would encourage people to do, share that with people you know. I also often spend Earth Day for me as a chance to reconnect. I live in a city that is very, very removed from nature. So I often go and I find a tree and I just sit by it for a while to kind of regenerate myself. So if you're someone who is feeling like burnt out from your work, a little bit hopeless, take this opportunity to actually just be near an ecosystem that means something to you. Those are my calls to action for Earth Day, yeah.
Thank you very much, Amelie. I think that's an important reminder of, you know, the need to challenge the systemic challenges of that we are facing, and also to call out those actors that are greenwashing on days like Earth Day, and to get involved in movements that can create systemic change. So with that, I'll pass over to Quetzal for your final statement.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to also honor that like all the ladies on this panel. I think it's a beautiful symbolism for, or yeah, the patriarchy to the matriarchy lineage. I think is like representative of the Earth, Earth Day spirit. I think that like we all systems do need to change, and I hope that we continue to transform those in our lives too, not just like on social media, that we like listen more to the feminines, we move more in feminine ways, as well as like integrating the masculine and doing this. Yeah, I guess I want to preface that I identify as two spirits, so like this balance within ourselves is representative of the balance that we need to see out in the world, this masculine and feminine, and that we shouldn't be really fighting against these two energies. We should be really bringing them together and harmonize together so that we can live in coexistence. And if we can do that within ourselves, we can do that for the Earth. So, I hope that inspires anyone who heard that message, just like, that, it's all within, and that, the Earth will receive. And if you ever need help, you can, ask the Earth for support. Thank you.
Another very important, beautiful message. Finally, Pella, I'll give you the last word for today's message.
Wow, so many great words. So I would just say that, believe in and cultivate your love for the Earth. And that's easy to say, but it's not always easy to do because it hurts. Like when we see all the destruction, it hurts. And to just sit with that and have it as something important and valuable, and a sign of your love for that which is much bigger and much older than you. And to find the others and have those conversations, like try your thoughts, cultivate your thoughts about this and learn more together. And even if those others are on the other side of the planet, that we can meet in these forms, or if they are your friends in your school, in your congregation, wherever, on your workplace, just, speak up, be the voice of the Earth.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that is every one of those messages, I think, means a lot and addresses a lot of our challenges that we face today. I think the worst we can do is sort of lose hope and give up, because I think there's actually so much happening and there's so many people fighting for change. It's just a question of how can we get involved to also address those systemic challenges. And with that, I really encourage you to check out both the Stop Ecocide movement, the Youth for Ecocide law movement, and the GAN hub, but also, yeah, the GAN Youth Hub and the GAN Global Hub, and the resources that are out there, and to consider getting involved in, well, in either or both or any of those initiatives, or whatever you feel called to, also at a local level, because, you know, as we heard, local actions and grassroots activism is really important. And I think, yeah, I mean, just check out the different social media platforms as well, the different links that have been shared in the chat. Thank you for your time. I know we've run a little bit over, but we wanted to actually end with a very, very short video clip that was made by a previous member of Youth for Ecocide Law. So I'll just close today's session with that by sharing that short video clip. And I want to thank you all for your time, and to the wonderful panelists for coming today, for sharing your initiatives, your words, and also food for thought for the future, and how we can better work together, and how we can fight for our future on Earth, and have this intergenerational dialogue, how we can, across, you know, different parts of the world, across generations, conquer these challenges and learn from each other in this. So without keeping all of you much longer, I will share the final screen once I figure out how to do that with my many tabs.
Just a quick thank you to Ezen for sharing that. I hope this has given everyone a little opportunity to reflect on our discussion today, to take some time also to be still and to connect also to your creative side, to the natural world around you. And it's a beautiful reminder, I think, to connect to art. I know we've talked about law a lot today, to connect all the different talents that we have. You don't have to be a lawyer to be involved in any of these movements. And I think that's a great reminder that this little video was today. So thank you so much for your time today and for sharing your stories. And yes, take care, and let's continue on this journey together towards protecting our Earth and fighting for a just future.